Welcome, everyone. This is Jim Gasparini. I'm Vice President of the Institute for Historical Study, and I'm sitting in for Dan Kohansky, who's usually in this spot. And today we are welcoming Liz Schott, who uh, is working on a biography of Dorothy Wright Liebes, excuse me. Oh gosh. She is a retired educator who lives in Sebastopol, and her proposal for Useful and Beautiful, The Life of Dorothy Wright Liebes won the Biographers International Organization's Hazel Rowley Prize in June of 2025. And with that, let's take it away, Liz.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. And I just want to tell Scott, thank you for being here. And this is the program you saw at Treasure Island. If you want to go have coffee, I won't be offended. But thank you for being here if not. So is my screen showing?
It is.
Okay, great. So thanks everybody. I retired from my career as an educational leader, culminating in 10 years as a district superintendent in 2020. Giving up my day job provided the time I needed to indulge my lifelong interest in design and fashion. Having always loved beautiful garments, I learned how to sew properly and became knowledgeable about textiles, often listening to podcasts while sewing, in particular one called Dressed, A History of Fashion. Dressed introduced me to Dorothy Wright Liebes. Dorothy Wright Liebes was an influential weaver and textile designer who dominated the interiors landscape in the first half of the 20th century in San Francisco, Chicago, Hawaii, New York, and Hollywood. She was a native Northern Californian, born in Guerneville in 1897 and raised in Santa Rosa. Liebes's Sonoma County roots and early employment as a teacher resonated with me, and I now find myself 2 years into researching and writing Useful and Beautiful, The Life of Dorothy Wright Liebes. Dorothy Wright was never idle, even in her youth. Born 2 months premature, it became a cliche among her neighbors to say, Dorothy was in such a rush to start making things that she couldn't wait to be born. She painted flower pots to sell on the street corner for 75 cents and recreated the gardens at Versailles in her side yard, conscripting her 3 siblings, 2 of whom are shown here, as laborers. She paid them with her allowance. This quote, lacking the boxwood of Versailles, I would use blue iris for borders, is from Liebes's unpublished autobiography, part of her 40,000-page archive in the Smithsonian's Archive of American Art, all digitized. Wright graduated from Santa Rosa High School in 1916 and spent the next dozen years at San Jose Normal, UC Berkeley, and Columbia University, with teaching stints in Hayward and Piedmont, California, and at Columbia's Horace Mann School. She was settled in New York, selling pram robes to Saks Fifth Avenue until 1928, when she married Leon Liebes, president of San Francisco's H. Liebes and Company. Dorothy attempted to settle into San Francisco society as the wife of a big retail store owner at the top of Nob Hill. Here is the building she lived in at 1001 California Street, directly across from the PU Club and kitty corner to the Fairmont. But she did not succeed. The marriage officially lasted 18 years, but the couple lived separately for the last dozen. They divorced in 1946. In 1938, after establishing her studio in San Francisco and securing several high-profile commissions, Liebes was named director of the Decorative Arts Pavilion for the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition. More on this shortly. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Liebes was sickened by the United States internment of Japanese American citizens. Simultaneously, she was worried about the effect the war would have on her business, concerned that textiles would be considered a frivolity in those dire days. They weren't, but she was called to a higher duty, one which occupied her all of her time for the next 3 years. In her role as art director of the Red Cross's Arts and Skills program during World War II, she diligently worked on behalf of injured veterans, believing strongly in the therapeutic value of art. Liebes traveled constantly on behalf of Arts and Skills, even returning to her native Santa Rosa to appeal for support. She wrote, My whole theory of making anything is that while the therapeutic angle may be the theme song, it might just as well be something useful and beautiful instead of a bad design, which would in the end perhaps produce disappointment and frustration. Useful and beautiful themselves, Liebes's hand-woven designs softened the hard edges of the ultra-utilitarian international style of architecture popular in the mid-20th century. Her textiles were not, quote, mere yardage, but an intentional and thoughtful contribution to a space, according to Alexa Griffith-Winton of 𝘉𝘭𝘥𝘦 Design Museum, which hosted an exhibit of Liebes's work in 2023. Liebes was a favorite of many architectural giants, including Frank Lloyd Wright, who found in her a kindred romantic spirit. He selected her textiles for several of his projects. The Liebes look was known for its use of ribbons, loops, lace, rattan, coordination with other design elements like wallpaper, and often coordination with the owner's personality, shine, color, and sometimes all of the above. In the 1940s and 50s and 60s, Liebes enjoyed widespread publicity, resulting in, quote, Dorothy Liebes becoming a household name. She was the subject of exhibits across America, was in magazines and on television, and received scores of awards. Fashion designers made garments out of her yardage, and Hollywood even came calling. Liebes's textiles can be seen in movies from that era, including Lover Come Back, starring Lucille Ball. You can see over Lucille Ball's left shoulder is a Liebes textile. East Side, West Side, starring Ava Gardner. These drapes in the back are Liebes textiles. And Adam's Rib, starring Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. You can see these blinds on the window here on the left of the Adam's Rib photo, and also this ottoman and perhaps the couch. I'm not sure about that. Never threatened by the talent of others, Liebes mentored scores of designers, weavers, and other artists in her studios and championed diversity, equity, and inclusion almost a century before that acronym came into everyday use. Liebes's studios were known for being wonderful places to work, with something always being celebrated. But the San Francisco studio parties came to an end when Liebes closed up shop on the West Coast and relocated to New York, and where she married Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Relman, also known as Pat, Morin in 1948. Liebes did not have children of her own, something she called the greatest disappointment of her life, but she was an aunt for the ages, and these are her nieces and nephews. This one right here that she's holding on to in the right-hand photo is Tony Wright, who lives in Rohnert Park here by me, and we get together often, and she tells me things and I tell her things that I'm learning in my research. It's been quite a lovely relationship to have in this point in my research. Useful and Beautiful, The Life of Dorothy Wright Liebes will tell the story of how the daughter of a rancher and a teacher from rural Northern California became the first lady of the loom. In writing this first ever biography of Liebes, I am retracing her steps through Sonoma County, Chicago, New York, Oklahoma, Latin America, and Europe, and of course, the Magic City on Treasure Island. In 1939, my parents, then finishing up at Cal and preparing to get married in May 1940, enjoyed the Treasure Island Fair, as they always referred to it, along with 17 million others. Created on a mightily beefed up version of the 𝘎𝘭𝘰𝘵 Shoals, the Golden Gate International Exposition, or GGIE, celebrated the completion of the Golden Gate and Bay Bridges, and its 3 permanent structures were intended to serve as the region's commercial airport when the fair was done. This transformation from watery slush was poetically described in Treasure Island, the Magic City. Out of the shallow sands was rising a man-made island. Gigantic dredges were drawing material from the ocean bed to deposit it within a great stone-rimmed cup that loomed like a yawning crater on the north side of 𝘎𝘭𝘰𝘵 Island. A fleet of barges was plying back and forth, bringing tons of earth, rich loam, and full-grown trees. And architects and engineers were busy with blueprints and specifications, calculating, sketching, and planning the Magic City, which was to rise like the palace of Aladdin from the shimmering waters of San Francisco Bay. This is Hangar 2 right here in front, and Hangar 3 behind it. And Hangar 3 is where the Fine Arts and Decorative Arts building was. Construction complete, it was time to get to work making a World's Fair. Through no fault of her own, Dorothy Wright Liebes was behind the 8 ball already when she was asked to be the director of the Decorative Arts Pavilion at the 1939 fair. She wrote, "The idea for a decorative arts exhibit came as an afterthought. The overall planning had been going forward for more than 2 years when 3 prominent San Francisco women, Mrs. George Cameron, Mrs. Nyon Tucker, and Mrs. Helen Russell, who were born Crockers and DeYoungs, called attention to the fact that no provision had been made for showing objects that beautify the home. Liebes asked, wouldn't the average woman and man be more interested in objects found in the home? This question ultimately landed on the desk of Herbert Fleischacker, chairman of the Fine Arts Committee of the GGIE, who likely knew Liebes when she was desperately trying to be happy as the society matron her first husband, Leon Liebes, thought or hoped she would be. Fleischacker's wife, May Bell Greenbaum Fleischacker, may have crossed paths with Liebes when Liebes worked at the Esther Hellman Settlement House south of Market Street while pursuing her bachelor's degree at UC Berkeley in the 1920s. A favorite charity of prominent San Francisco Jewish women, Hellman House was likely familiar to Mrs. Fleischacker. Now, 20 years later, Mrs. Fleischacker's daughter-in-law was serving on Liebes's honorary committee at the GGIE. Liebes wrote, I had come to know most of the members of the operating committee during my civic virtue era, the years early in her first marriage when she contributed to making San Francisco a cultural center. Here she is with artist Maurice Stern and designer Lucien Labeau planning the Fairmont Hotel's Perilia Ball in 1935. Characteristically, Liebes downplayed the why for her selection to lead this division of the exposition. In fact, beginning in 1935, her prominent clients included Doris Duke's Shangri-La, Yosemite's Ahwahnee Hotel, and the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange in San Francisco. It was this last commission that positioned her alongside Adeline Kent, Ralph Stackpole, and Diego Rivera, who was creating his 3-story tall mural, Allegory of California, under the direction of architect Timothy Pfluger. Soon, all 4 artists and the architect would be reunited at the GGIE. Liebes was also getting noticed in the shelter and fashion magazines at this time. House and Garden and Vogue included her weaving in editorial spreads. And these are from the digitized records at the Archives of American Art. And in all of her scrapbooks, Liebes would do a little highlighting of the parts of the pages that were about her. So that is very helpful when you're flipping through thousands of pages to have these little visual cues. And she was also winning awards, including the Diplôme d'Honneur Gold Medal from the International Exhibition of Art and Technology in Modern Life in Paris for her textile that has become known as schiaparelli, into which tape measures are woven. She also received the Lord and Taylor Design Award for significant contributions to the field of decorative fabrics. This clipping is from one of Liebes's 33 scrapbooks in the Archives of American Art, which are described by the Smithsonian as consisting of primarily printed matter, some photographs, and extensive documentation of Liebes's career, including her professional achievements, commissions, and studio operations. So, while an attractive proposition from the standpoint of spreading the word about the decorative arts, the timing of the GGIE offer wasn't ideal for Liebes's career. Or perhaps that's what she wanted Fleischacker to think when she negotiated her contract. You see here, she says, the compensation for myself at $500 per month, in addition to all expenses while traveling, the expenses to be computed at the customary basis paid your associates. Her letters assured him that she was flattered at being asked, but not so blinded that she would do the job for nothing. Liebes negotiated her contract and compensation with the maturity and shrewdness of a much more experienced professional. Fleischhacker may have been somewhat flummoxed by a woman with so much moxie, but they came to an agreement. Liebes may also have benefited in her negotiations from a short-lived publication called The Coast Magazine, an attempt to create a West Coast version of The New Yorker. A feature in the January 1939 issue was called, "In 1938, these went to town, and these had rough sledding." Included in those who went to town were Hedy Lamarr, Seabiscuit, and Dorothy Liebes. Ironically, Herbert Fleischhacker, oh, there's Seabiscuit. I just like that picture. So pretty. Ironically, Herbert Fleischhacker was grouped with the Rough Sledders alongside William Randolph Hearst, Marlene Dietrich, and the ferry boats of the San Francisco Bay. The ferries, this photo shows one going under the construction of the Bay Bridge. The ferries had been made obsolete by the Bay and Golden Gate bridges, whose completion the GGIE was celebrating. Once on board and realizing the urgency of her assignment, Liebes wasted no time preparing for what one newspaper reported was her 20,000-mile trip around Europe seeking art stuff for the exhibition. But first, she had to find someone to transform an airline hangar into a display space worthy of the quality of exhibits she had in mind. The Palace of Fine and Decorative Arts, Building 3, was completed in mid-1938 and stands today. It was one of the 3 permanent buildings erected for the GGIE meant to serve as airplane storage when Treasure Island was converted to the area's commercial airport after the fair. World War II and the Navy's need for the 400 acres in the middle of San Francisco Bay superseded the public's need for the Treasure Island Airport. But Building 3 served the GGIE first as a museum for the $20 million worth of highly prized fine and decorative artwork, according to the official guidebook. Some estimates go as high as $40 million for the art. It covered over 2 acres and had an open 3-hinge riveted steel arch truss system that soared to 80 feet at its highest point. The cost, $450,000. About a third of the floor space, 25,000 square feet, was dedicated to the decorative arts. Liebes explained her dilemma on how to convert this space into a proper display space to her close friend Helen Delaney, an industrial designer and Chicago society matron, who responded, "I think your man is right here in Chicago, Shepard Vogelgesang of the Art Institute." In a single phone call with Vogelgesang, Liebes described the exhibit she visualized, told him that it would be housed in a hangar normally used for mooring balloons, and gave him the shape and square footage available. Vogelgesang, undaunted, set to work at once. A preliminary color-coded diagram shows the decorative arts display at the center of a large open space building, surrounded by several of the fair's other exhibits, including the Arts of the Pacific, European and American art, and old master paintings. Pencil marks indicate a sinuous route through the space, as you can see right here, involving a spiral at the upper left corner. You can also see that the back of this paper, you can see through it, it's onion skin, was used for some other note-taking purpose. With a director of design now in place, Liebes could leave for Europe. Prior to her departure, Liebes remembered going through magazines, newspapers, and art catalogs from the countries in Europe I intended to visit, searching them for likely examples of their arts and crafts and the names of people I hoped would be helpful to me. Her file folders took up an entire suitcase. The focus of the GGIE was to the west. It called itself the Pageant of the Pacific, and the Pacific motif came to govern much of the fair's art, architecture, and programming. It was conveyed by 2 primary sites at the fair, the Court of the Pacific and the Pacific area. And yet, Liebes focused her collecting on Europe and North America. She left no clues as to why she didn't give Asia and Australia any attention. There may simply not have been enough time. En route to Europe, Liebes stopped in Chicago, where she was given her first show at the Arts Club. Correspondence with Mrs. Charles Goodspeed, president of the Arts Club of Chicago, was hectic as Liebes juggled her GGIE commitments, but ultimately the show took place as scheduled. She wrote, "Find that I can be in Chicago last of May after all, as we go to Europe June 1st. Sorry to have upset you. Best regards." If there was any lingering upset, Liebes may have smoothed it over by inviting Goodspeed to be a member of the honorary committee for the decorative arts at the GGIE, and the two reunited in Paris a few short months later. While in Chicago, Liebes took time to source pieces for possible inclusion in the GGIE. Among these was a, quote, life-size wire mesh figure recently displayed in a Michigan Avenue shop window, the handiwork of Jane Founce, Olympic diving champion. Jane Founce was one of the first women featured on a Wheaties box, and a member of the same sorority as Liebes, Kappa Alpha Theta. She also met multidisciplinary artist Edgar Miller and left Chicago thinking he might do a modern chapel at the GGIE, but this brainstorm did not come to fruition. Instead, Miller's work was on display in the book illustration category, where the Container Corporation of America's World Atlas highlighted his drawings. Finally on her way aboard the Queen Mary, Liebes's massive folders held letters of introduction to a sizable segment of the total art population of Europe, like this one from Leland Cutler, president of the GGIE, which reads, "This will introduce Mrs. Dorothy Liebes, who is in charge of decorative arts at the Golden Gate International Exposition. Mrs. Liebes is engaged in the very important work of organizing a decorative arts section of the exposition's fine arts program. Any assistance you can give to Mrs. Liebes will be greatly appreciated." Liebes relied on these introductions from her colleagues in America for entree to salons, galleries, and homes. Not content to simply spotlight the masters, Liebes sought out works that embraced modernism. Her itinerary found her racing through 9 countries in 6 weeks: France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Italy, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Britain, with intermediaries bringing her Polish and Finnish objects. Aboard the Queen Mary, Liebes wrote to her good friend, San Francisco art patron Albert Bender. She noted that everyone, including the stewardess, thought she was dead and that a burial at sea was all but a formality. But she rebounded and discovered that a lot of New York World's Fair officials were her fellow passengers. She says, "Tons of people I know on board, including a lot of New York Fair officials. So I'm being Matahari and getting the dope. They are trying to put on a better art show than ours, but we'll fool them." Her daily calendar in Paris alone verifies the claim that on an average day, I entered a dozen or more ateliers, museums, private homes, and factories. I could not begin to estimate the number of conferences with artists, craftsmen, and collectors. A misstep, like boarding a southbound train to Berlin when she meant to go north from Hamburg to Copenhagen, caused a minor meltdown. "I remember thinking frantically, I've lost at least 6 hours," she wrote, hours she could scarcely afford to lose. On June 28th, she met with fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli at 3 o'clock, and bookending her day were a meeting in the morning and evening cocktails with André Comte de Nemours, a French count and diplomat, and his wife, San Francisco's Ethel Crocker, of the Big Four Crockers. Ethel's sister was Mrs. Helen Russell, one of the women who insisted there be a decorative arts component at the fair. De Nemours, a titled gentleman, a sort of commissioner at large for France, had drawn up a list of objects to represent French decorative arts in the exposition, Liebes wrote. "When I saw it, my heart sank. He was living in the past. If he saw any beauty or value in contemporary art, it was not apparent. My ideas revolted him." But Liebes hewed to her vision and bid him adieu. She concluded it was an awkward situation. On Wednesday the 29th, there were visits to textile houses in the morning, followed by an afternoon appointments with Sonia Delaunay, our friend Mrs. Goodspeed from Chicago. And on Friday, July 1st, lunch was taken with Michel Frank and dinner with Marcel Duchamp. Toward the end of this day, There was shopping to be done at Rodier's, Cartier, and Boinet. Receipts from purchases of some Parisian things indicate they were to be delivered to Madame Liebe Dorothy cabine de première classe sur Normandie, the ship on which she sailed home. My butchered French is written out right here. The Normandy is not one of the modes of travel Liebes took that I'll be reliving, since it sunk in the New York harbor in 1942 while being converted into a troop ship during World War II. Liebes had many appointments with Marie Catoli, the moving spirit in the revival of French tapestry following the First World War. The remarkable array of artists Catoli commissioned to design tapestries included Braque, Derain, Dufy, Le Corbusier, Léger, Lursa, Ray, Miro, Picasso, and Rouault. She had the textiles woven in Aubusson or Beauvais, Liebes wrote, historic centers of French tapestry, and arranged for them to be exhibited internationally. One of these exhibitions was the GGIE. Liebes described her first meeting with Catoli. An introduction was duly arranged, and I was taken to her beautiful home in the Rue de Babylon in Paris. It was like a gallery of painting, modern painting. She became one of the great connoisseurs and patrons of art. Marie unlocked Paris for me. She knew all the leading artists and craftsmen. She guided me to the ateliers and studios where I was shown their finest works. Liebes described one particularly memorable luncheon at Catoli's when she met Picasso. She wrote, he was a stubby, muscular man with broad shoulders and the dark complexion of the Basques. His dark eyes constantly darted around the room, and they lit upon the scarf I was wearing, fashioned from my own hand-loomed material. He stepped in front of me, reached upwards, he was much shorter than I, and without so much as a by your leave, took the scarf from around my neck and stuffed it in his pocket. I presume he gave it to whoever was his girlfriend at the time. Reflecting on her European tour, Liebes was struck by something that seemed curious, she wrote. She had been advised to ask for more than I expected to get in every case. This was the rule of thumb among experienced collectors. Then, if you receive 75% of what you asked to borrow, you will be just about right. Instead, she found artists and craftsmen, quote, more than eager to loan their works. She had items pushed on her wherever she went. Where I might ask for a few choice pieces, the owners would urge me to take more. At first, I assumed it was because the artists and craftsmen simply wanted to be well represented at the exposition, she wrote. But when Mussolini sent numerous great and famous paintings, among them the Sistine Madonna, Liebes was suspicious. As crates began arriving in San Francisco, the mystery deepened. Where she was expecting one carton of precious objects, she got 4 or 5. Finally, it dawned on her. Had I been more politically minded, I would have perceived the underlying reason early in my travels, the increasing fear of war in Europe. This was in the late summer of 1938, just over a year before Hitler attacked Poland, Liebes wrote. He had already annexed Austria, and people asked each other where his next move might take place. Wherever I went, people asked each other, are we going to have another war? Nobody could say with certainty, but in any case, the prudent artist or collector found in our exposition and in the New York World's Fair of 1939 a convenient opportunity to remove his treasures to a safe haven. Some were never returned. Oh. Leaving no stone unturned, Liebes swung through Dallas on her way home from Europe to pick up yet another award, one of the first inaugural Neiman Marcus plaques for distinguished service in the field of fashion. She wrote, by the time I returned to San Francisco, the buildings for the Decorative Arts exhibition were well along. With the space now nearly ready, receiving and unpacking the crates and boxes must have been thrilling, especially since there were so many more of them than expected. A partial list of lenders reveals their points of origin: Paris, London, Denmark, Holland, Norway, and Sweden. How were all the objects displayed? Liebes explained, these exquisite examples of arts and crafts were installed in rooms designed by Le Corbusier for France, John Duncan Miller for England, and many others. They were well balanced by American rooms and vignettes of American craft art. And this is Dr. Grace Morley with Liebes, who was the director of the San Francisco Museum of Art. Liebes described unpacking beautifully bound books from Rose Adler's atelier in Paris, lovely textiles from Astrid Sampa, who later became the head designer for the Nordiska Kompaniet, the largest store in Sweden. Unusual examples of tapestry from the guilds of Scotland. Chromium and steel furniture by Dutch artist J.J.P. Oud. Carpets from Marion Dorns and McKnight Coffer's London workshop. Glass from Sweden. And modern, which goes without saying, silver from Denmark. Inasmuch as they were her team, as we would say today, Liebes nurtured the same camaraderie and positive morale among her 𝘠𝘰𝘬𝘳𝘭 co-workers as she did with her studio employees. And like her, they were working hard. Photos from Liebes's personal albums show workers on break, eating, smoking, drinking coffee, and socializing. Here is Ralph Stackpole and an unidentified colleague basking in some winter sun. And Liebes is right there with them. Here she is, off to the side, strategizing with Dr. Morley, who held several roles across the two fairs. Celebrations were a must. Identifying the occasion this photo memorializes is an ongoing challenge, but we love its caricatures on the table and the illuminated book in the background. Several members of the party are identifiable, among them Liebes, Morley, 𝘍𝘭𝘥𝘬𝘳, and Langdon Warner, the inspiration for Indiana Jones, Antonio Sotomayor, and perhaps Kay Caldwell, Warner's student. If anybody has any help with this photo, I would love to hear from you, because I would love to be able to know who did the caricatures and who all of these happy people are. And here's Liebes in the middle in the back. And Grace Morley. So even with all that expertise at hand, it wasn't always easy to get it right when displaying modern art. A lucite carving by Russian-American sculptor, designer, and architect Noam Gabo was apparently installed upside down. In a wire from Gabo, in which he recounts seeing a picture of the exhibit, Liebes learned that it was topsy-turvy. A newspaper account of the international incident reported that Liebes removed the carving to her office pending further examination. A member of the Sanity in Art League, Haig Padigan, studied the $1,200 piece of lucite coldly and concluded maybe it has no right side up. Other artists, like Siri Mom, left nothing to the imagination with her directions for creating the plaster curtains in the Souvenir de Paris room, where they shared wall space with oyster shells. When you have done the whole length on one side, went too far. When you have done the whole length on one side, you turn it over on the table and do the other side. It is disgustingly messy, but that is the only way to do it satisfactorily. Temperamental artists presented unique challenges. Interior designer Pierre Dutel petulantly argued his case the week before opening day. He wrote, "Can't you work in even a flat space where I could set something up very smart and dramatic? Try, for I feel you've let me down very badly." This got him nowhere. Liebes responded, "For heaven's sake, I am the one who felt and still feel let down. I did ask you and felt that in the rush of your busy life, our little San Francisco project must have seemed insignificant to you because I heard nothing more from you." She was never one to let a slight to her beloved West go unaddressed. Finally, opening day arrived and the pomp and circumstance that came with it. Opening night was even more of a spectacle as the famed lighting design turned Treasure Island into a fairyland. The press reported that, to the unanimous satisfaction of more than 100,000 wide-eyed, breathless first-nighters, the Golden Gate International Exposition justified its claim to a superlative title last night. Merely by lighting itself up, it established its right to call itself the most beautiful exposition the world has ever seen. Or, as one fairgoer exclaimed, "It was sure swell." In the Fine and Decorative Arts Pavilion, 𝘍𝘭𝘥𝘳𝘦 had created a world all its own that included a space for the Thorn miniature rooms, a dozen model rooms, and ateliers where visitors could see artisans at work. That spiral from the colored pencil sketch can be seen in its proper place here. Liebes likened these workshops to surgical theaters with circular raised seating areas around a stage on which artisans demonstrated their skills. If Liebes felt that the Thorn miniature rooms contrasted with her future-facing focus, she gave no indication of such. Her correspondence with Narcissa Thorn, who loaned them to the GGIE, was warm, and her advocacy for the rooms was equal to all other aspects of the show. Liebes wrote in the catalog that the 30 tiny masterpieces demonstrated the criteria of taste in the homes of an earlier era. She characterized them as an historical prelude to the modern exhibit, which came under the heading of entertainment. She said, quote, "They were learning aids, preparing the visitor for the large modern rooms beyond, all at a 1:12 scale." This room is, I don't know how to describe it mathematically. It's tiny. If it were blown up 12 times, it would be normal sized. Critic Emily Joseph was effusive in her description of the space for the July 1939 issue of Magazine of Art. Quote, "There is rhythm, motion, unexpectedness in the layout of the decorative arts complex, a complete organism within the immense shell of the fine arts building of the San Francisco Fair. Its excellent spatial design gives the illusion of doubled area because of the flowing line plan and the changing levels in ground floor, inclined plane, and balcony. The axis of the Decorative Arts Division is the group of exhibition rooms designed and executed by American and European interior decorators. Of unequal size, the rooms radiate from a winding ramp, an arrangement that does away with museum fatigue and the flatness of conventional display. The liveliness of the whole design is well seen from the balcony, which gives over to rooms, workshops, and winding showcases filled with collections of silver, ceramics, glass, textiles, book bindings, and many other objects. The tapestry salon was built around Catoli's collection of modern tapestries. 𝘍𝘭𝘥𝘳 gave her room the place of honor in the decorative arts section, placing it in the very center where all who entered would see it. Its importance may be judged by the names of the artists whose work were installed there. There is seating by Dufy, tapestries by 𝘠𝘚 and Matisse, ceramic vases by Dufy, a rug by Miro, and a base for the table carved by Laurent. As Liebes wrote, it was a feast. This was just one of the functional and fantastic rooms styled for the 20th century, spectacularly staged by Liebes's colleagues, including Francis Elkins, William Pullman, Gardner Daly, William Wurster. Others included the Desert Living Room with its California Joshua wood walls and Georgia O'Keeffe painting, designed and arranged by William Haynes of Hollywood. A Room for a Bachelor with its Cecilia Graham relief above the bed, Jane Berlandino mural above the fireplace, and Herman Miller furniture, including the leather veneer bed designed by F. Eldon Baldoff of San Francisco. And the dining room, designed by Alvar and Aina Aalto of Finland, which featured a screen painted by Picasso, a rug woven by Loja Saarinen, Gobbo's glass abstraction, whose upside couldn't be determined, and a tabletop called Celestial Movement by Alameda's own Esther Bruton. A reporter for the interior decorator specified that the general forms of the room is a wide rectangle, 16 by 20 feet, fronted by a terrace space about 10 by 20 feet, which will be designed for outdoor living. Liebes described the outdoor terraces as, quote, "the first effort on a large scale to stress the relationship between the architecture of outdoor design and interior design. This space, part of the overall outdoor living space created by Richard Neutra, featured the sculptural glass designs of Dorothy Thorpe, along with accessories from the luxury San Francisco retailer Gumps. Protection from the harsh sunlight was provided by a dramatic photo-screened textile by James West." Liebes concluded, Just as I believe the exposition had a strong impact on American taste in general, I believe we succeeded in stimulating popular interest in indoor-outdoor living. Bringing the outdoors in presented a particular challenge, however, in the case of the Souvenir de Paris room, designed and assembled by Etienne Coleman of Paris, with its costumes designed by Lanvin and Schiaparelli and oyster shell plastered walls. In Retailing magazine, Alfred Auerbach told the story of how the shells were sourced. Quote, "Probably nothing funnier has ever occurred in the history of decorative arts exhibits than the saga of the shell room by Coleman of Paris. He sent Mrs. Liebes complete watercolor renderings and a description for the installation of his room, and also a 12-inch square plaque of oyster shells embedded in plaster in the manner he wanted the walls to look. But where to get the 20,000 shells needed for the room? Soon, Mrs. Liebes had her volunteer committee at work, combing all the hotels and restaurants of the city for discarded oyster shells, and limousines were driving up to the building and depositing little bags of shells. Yet the progress was too slow, and furthermore, prices began to rise until some asked some asked 3 cents a shell. Came the morning when it was discovered that a firm specializing in oysters would be glad to send along all of the needed shells if they could obtain catalog credit. When they were dropped off in the building, the curious pungent odor of a fishmonger's shop pervaded the air. Not to be outwitted by a mere olfactory challenge, Junior League debutantes were called to the rescue, and 27 gallons of muriatic acid consumed as they scrubbed and deodorized the shells with their own lily-white hands. Every once in a while, a staff member would go through the room spraying perfume as an added help. But it's all right now. The shells are entirely quiescent, and the room is unquestionably the hit of the show." End quote. Setting aside the question of whether or not mingling perfume and oysters would improve the air, is it possible that Liebes had a delivery made to Treasure Island from Parfum Schiaparelli in New York on February 9, 1939 for this purpose, as this mustard-colored receipt shows? It seems unlikely, though, since this receipt was for just 1 atomizer and 8 ounces of cologne, quote, strengthened with perfume. This would have been a job for a boatload of cheap scent. Although none of Liebes's weaving was showcased in the Decorative Arts Pavilion, she did find time to put her imprimatur on the 𝘕�モ𝘱𝘰 Club, the 2-story modernist clubhouse between the main building and the hangars, which was a gathering spot for California club women, including ladies of high society who purchased memberships, as well as for prominent visitors, according to Scott Powell, author of Frances Elkins' Visionary American Designer. Designed and decorated by her close friends, William Worcester and Frances Elkins, Liebes pulled out all the stops with upholstery fabric for the chairs in the private dining room, which focused on textural contrast. Vermilion red, woven with bands of raw silk and cotton chenille loops, these chairs brought a pop of color and likely got snagged on more than a few zippers and snaps on the backs and seats of women's dresses. Commonly thought to be a feature starting with the 1940 exposition, Art in Action was actually Dorothy Liebes's idea for the 1939 fair. In addition to the static displays, Liebes wanted to show the public, quote, firsthand the skill of the worker to deepen its wonder of beautiful things. In her catalog notes, Dr. Grace Morley wrote that the exhibition as a whole has been planned to emphasize the part the artist-designer and the artist-craftsman play in the decorative arts field. The workshops show the creative minds and hands in action. The caption on the back of this photo of the Art in Action Theater reads, "Ceramic pit in the foreground, weavers and metalworkers, and in the further distance, sculptor Frederick Olmsted, great-nephew of the Frederick Law Olmsted, working on a head of the Leonardo da Vinci for the San Francisco Junior College Science Building." It also notes that the photographer was Ansel Adams. Art in Action is best remembered for Diego Rivera painting his colossal fresco, Pan-American Unity, high above the pavilion at the 1940 fair. In a letter to Randall Larson, the exposition's attorney, dated a month before the opening of this second iteration of the GGIE, Liebes commented that she was, quote, delighted to hear from Tim Pfluger that he has gotten a hold of Diego Rivera, and certainly this dainty personality should pack them in. When Diego gets his 300 pounds on a piece of scaffold, it is really good theater. The completed mural shown here, all 22 by 74 feet of it, and 60,000 pounds, is now awaiting its permanent home in the San Francisco City College Library. Now we're taking a trip back in time to 1920. Where did Liebes come up with the plan for art in action? She was first exposed to the idea of art in action at Chicago's Hull House in 1920, where she studied this for 2 weeks during the summer. It was called the Labor Museum. Art at Hull House, Liebes would have seen craftspeople creating their art like a living museum. According to Hull House Museum Director Liesl Olson, the Labor Museum allowed people to show the kind of expertise they brought from the old world in an effort to give it value. The Labor Museum was one of the most successful arts programs of the settlement, and it really was an experiment in response to the loss of heritage craft in the communities around Hull House. The sense that this ability to embroider, to knit, to work in complicated ways with textiles was being lost as older generations were dying out, Olson said. It was certainly in opposition to the kind of quick manufacture that was happening in factories. Much later in her career, Liebes would become known for mass production of textiles that looked like they were handmade. Her stated goal was to make beautiful and useful textiles available to every home in America. Possibly her tacit goal was to increase the commercial reach of her designs. But in her role at the GGIE, she carried the standard for handcraft with zeal. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt attended the fair on March 23, 1939, and insisted in her syndicated column My Day that nighttime was the best time to visit. "If you can do nothing else," she wrote, "be sure to take a wheelchair and roll around after the lights are lit. Go from court to court, get all the reflections in the water and all the different colors in the fountains. The pillars of the 48 states are striking, but not beautiful in the daytime, as are the murals. But at night, the effect is breathtaking. Going around the little lagoon where the paper lanterns hang over the water is as charming a sight as I hope ever to see." When not regaling his readers with shellfish stories, Alfred Auerbach lauded Liebes for an aspect of the GGIE that visitors and lay people would not be aware of. "The show stood out," he wrote, "for its sane and sensible museum policy. Participants were treated exactly as were the contemporary painters or the sculptors in the adjacent fine art galleries. Rather than allowing anyone to rent space to display their wares, Liebes invited architects and designers to participate, and the GGIE bore the costs of making the installation, of the shipping, and of insurance. This ensured that the caliber and range of contemporary applied arts, not only nationally, but internationally, was properly demonstrated. It must have given the California-loving Liebes great pleasure to have Auerbach point out that the New York World's Fair, which has steadfastly refused to recognize the need of subsidizing an integrated design presentation, will to all appearances suffer somewhat by comparison with the job which the West Coast has done. The entire presentation, Auerbach concluded, reveals a discerning, keen understanding of who's who and what's what in modern art at the moment, and since the opening, applause has been lavished upon Mrs. Liebes for her accomplishments. Liebes collected press coverage of the GGIE in her numerous scrapbooks, and she was particularly fond of one article, calling it out in her autobiography. The headline of a September 1939 New York World Telegram article read, "World fabric designer made articulate art at fresco more profitable than Sally Rand." Sally Rand was a Missouri-born aspiring actress, but she took her talents in a different direction. Among the first and one of the most notorious fan dancers of the 1930s, Rand's Nude Ranch, a play on the name of the popular dude ranches of the day, was part of the GGIE's Gateway, an extravagant midway known as 40 Acres of Fun. On opening day, a line over a block long formed outside the Nude Ranch, which protected its cowgirls behind glass panels. The famous wooden sign with its crossed-out letter D was on full display, as were 40 rancherettes, who wore G-strings, bandanas, boots, belts, and holsters, and 10-gallon hats. Liebes called Sally Rand decorative art in the human form, but she wasn't sorry to outstrip them in profitability. Not everyone was enamored with the Decorative Arts Pavilion, or at least not with the tapestries. San Francisco Chronicle art critic Alfred Frankenstein asked in his March 12, 1939 column, Art Through the Needle's Eye, "But why do it? What call or necessity is there for a tapestry to bend over backwards to imitate something else? Is this a chic new fashion designed to create a new, costly, limited luxury article?" Frankenstein's critique may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Liebes's exhaustion had been building. Just getting around the fairground's 400 acres took its toll. The wheelchairs described by Mrs. Roosevelt helped. But just days after the fair's opening, Liebes begged a reporter to forgive her for looking and talking the way I do. "I haven't had any sleep for the past 4 days." In fact, she had been lying down, if not sleeping, on the floor of her office in the weeks leading up to February 18th, and now she was paying the price. The reporter ended her piece by speaking directly to Liebes, saying, "Well, Dorothy, if you act and look as charming as you did after a stay-awake siege like that, I'm afraid we would be totally overwhelmed by a completely rested you." Liebes's obsession with detail, soothing of egos, sleeping on the floor, looming deadlines, and overwhelming numbers of objects had caught up with her. By March, she was suffering from neuralgia, pain caused by a nerve that's irritated or damaged and which can be caused by shingles. Shingles can be brought on by stress. Liebes suffered from several severe cases of shingles later in her life, so this may have been the cause in 1939 as well. She was taken in by Henry and May Brandenstein, friends from San Francisco, at their home in Palm Springs for rest and recuperation. While there, her worried studio employees wrote long, newsy letters meant to help. They did not. They write, "Staub wired us for final price on 16 lengths for the museum, so it looks like that is finally coming through. Hooray for our side. Also, got the order for 28 yards of the cellophane for the H. Liebes and Company. It will certainly improve that dark corner. Also praying for you to get good and rested and be your old self again and not the tired Dorothy I saw the day you left for Palm Springs." Her husband wrote long prescriptive letters meant to help. They did not. "I therefore recommend that after a rest, you give up the exposition job and devote your time primarily to the studio. Leave the Fairmont." Dorothy had moved into the Fairmont out of their apartment, and he wanted her back. And finally, he says, "Not a word herein is to be construed as censure. You have told me before that you grasped things better in writing." And even a short love letter from a suitor must have just felt like added pressure at this point. "Dearest Dorothy, what an utterly charming person you are. I have thought of you and all the loveliness that you are, and your great thoughtfulness. All there is to say is thank you. Love to you, Peter." Anyone who knew Liebes, however, could not have imagined she'd abandon the job. She just wasn't a quitter. And so, rested somewhat sufficiently, she returned from the desert to Treasure Island, despite her husband's admonishments. Throughout the spring and summer of 1939, she presided over staff meetings. And there are some funny bits in here. I mean, it just sounds like any staff meeting anywhere where you don't have enough seating, you don't have enough lighting, you don't have a sign showing where the restrooms are, your supplies are disappearing. But this one in the middle is funny where it says the Coleman room should be disinfected and perfumed. That's the oyster room. So that was an ongoing need. And she also spoke at engagements across the state and taught multiple series of classes about the modern decorative arts. She sold and distributed catalogs, the extraordinary catalogs she compiled and published just months earlier. And she hosted these are these little notes in the archive that she sold 20 catalogs in Healdsburg, which is just all over the state doing work on behalf of the exposition once it got started. She hosted VIPs, including American textile designer Margareta Mergentheim, Swedish architect, interior designer, and textile artist Elsa Gullberg, Finnish architects and designers Alvar and Aina Aalto, Cranbrook weaver Marianne Strangel, book editor and publisher Albert Boney, and interior designer William Paulman. She also proudly showed her family around the grounds. You can see it says down here, visit to the fair. Aunt Dodo heads decorative arts. That's what her family called her, was Aunt Dodo. But after just 8 months, it was time to return the objets d'art that had not been sold to their owners. Returning the works of art to Europe, however, both fine and decorative, turned out to be a multi-year endeavor. Liebes wrote, "War broke out in Europe in September 1939. Immediately, many of those who had loaned us objects for the exposition cabled, asking us to Immediately, many of those who had loaned us objects for the exposition cabled, asking us to sell them and deposit the receipts in American banks. She hypothesized that those they never heard from may have been killed in the fighting or in Nazi extermination camps, concluding a sad postscript to a glorious event." Some pieces were sold, though not as many as Liebes and other organizers would have had the public believe. Harry Camp, a prominent San Francisco milliner, bought many pieces, including Femme l'Oiseau. Laurent created many statues with the same name. One of these may be the interpretation Harry Camp bought. Samuel Marks, Chicago-based architect, designer, and interior decorator, was Liebes's regular collaborators. He bought a Miro rug from 𝘍𝘁 called Mangouste for $155, $121.50 of which went to 𝘍𝘁. Pieces that remained with the GGIE had to go somewhere because there was another fair coming and space was needed. But even if an owner wanted to have their piece returned, it was inadvisable to ship irreplaceable art that could be collateral damage in a mine explosion or bombing, and insurance was prohibitively expensive. Liebes communicated this fact to all artists, collectors, guilds, and museums with whom she met in 1938. She wrote, "Owing to the prohibitive rate for war risk insurance, your loan to the exposition is being stored temporarily in the San Francisco de Young Memorial Museum. This museum is a splendid one, and all normal precautions are taken for safeguarding the treasures housed therein. However, the de Young Museum does not insure." There was one artist who likely wished he'd not pushed to have his object returned. As reported by San Francisco Chronicle columnist 𝘠𝘮 on July 6, 1940, quote, "One of the chief attractions of Dorothy Wright Liebes's decorative arts section in the Palace of Fine Arts at the 39 Fair was an extremely valuable model of a suspended house designed by famed Paul Nelson, now in France. Because of the fate of France, Mrs. Liebes for months held that model here until a particularly biting letter from Nelson prompted her to ship it to France several weeks back. Her written explanations that the model might be damaged seemed only to enrage Nelson, who in one letter accused her of trying to hold the model indefinitely. 2 days ago, Mrs. Liebes received a note from the insurance company. It read simply, 'The ship on which your house was transported has been sunk in the Atlantic.' Even the palm trees had to be transplanted. And these new stressors landed Liebes back in Palm Springs in January of 1940, again sequestering with the Brandensteins. She had to divorce herself from interactions with the Toledo Museum, which was going to take the decorative arts from the GGIE and display them, but then they couldn't. It says complications arose preventing decorative arts from exposition coming to Toledo. And they go on to say, "If not too much trouble, could you assist us in emergency by assembling group of California crafts must be here no later than January 27th, 9 days after the telegram was written." In a rare instance of self-care, Liebes wrote back, "Here at Palm Springs, doctor's orders, so regret not being free to get exhibit. Am sure Dr. Morley could get group together quickly. Liebes." Morley had become the de facto caretaker of the abandoned art, and for 6 years she worked tirelessly to arrange exhibitions or sales of the remaining pieces. And there were so many pieces. This is just a partial inventory of what was left behind, including a bicycle belonging to Elsa Schiaparelli. Liebes's close relationship with Marie Cattoli, however, meant that she would continue communicating with Liebes, not Morley, about her stranded art. Her friend Madame 𝘠𝘠𝘠 reached out to Liebes requesting liberation of their items in this letter dated August 31st, 1942. Madame Cattoli is so worried about our things at San Francisco, and so am I, the more so that I had an offer from a Mr. Gumps. Would it be possible for you to get in touch with him and liberate my statue and her textiles? And a year later, there were still textiles, including the rugs referenced in this 1943 telegram to return to Marie Cattoli. Quote, very thankful if you examined rugs and considered in good condition, so be shipped at once. Have paid customs and shipment. Fondly, Marie Cattoli. When the fair ended, Liebes reflected that the trainloads of beautiful so I don't want to go there yet. When the fair ended, Liebes reflected that the trainloads of beautiful objects people purchased and took home with them to all corners of America were proof that the American housewife's standards of taste were rapidly rising. Answering in the affirmative the question she had posed in 1938, wouldn't the average woman and man be interested in objects found in the home? Apparently they were. But the Second World War would temporarily derail the nation's ability to satisfy its rising standards. Liebes spent the war years investing her heart and soul in the Red Cross Arts and Skills effort. She finally took time to reflect on the GGIE years later while writing her autobiography. She concluded, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the exposition to my work. It taught me so much and brought me into the orbit of so many artists, collectors, and patrons of art that I at last felt I was firmly established. My name became known in Europe, and the exposition called wider attention in America to my work. It was a turning point in my career. It was also a turning point in the West's knowledge of and appreciation for modern decorative arts and artists, thanks to Dorothy Wright Liebes. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
And thank you, Liz. That was fascinating. I felt like I've been in a time machine going back to that period. I just wish I could have strolled down the streets of Treasure Island or been driven along like Eleanor Roosevelt.
Right.
Yeah, God, I wonder how much how much your book do you plan to have illustrations? Because the illustrations here that you found are so wonderful.
Well, I guess that depends on the publisher. As yet to be named, yet to be chosen publisher. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I would like it very much to be like the Ruth Asawa book, Everything She Touched, that Chronicle Books published, and it's interspersed throughout with images, rather than having a group, in the middle kind of thing. But we'll see.
Okay, well, Peter's raised his hand, and please, okay.
Yes, thanks very much for the fascinating talk. I have to leave in a moment for a visit. I have a visitor. My personal memory of the exposition is negative in the sense that at the age of 7, I was quite furious. I remember being furious at my parents and my 2 uncles as they left me with my grandparents in Texas, and they drove off to see the exhibition.
Oh,
And I thought I should have been taken along. But I wondered, I'm not quite sure of the chronology, but with the World's Fair in New York, which of course I went to, was there rivalry? How much rivalry was there between the 2 fairs?
my understanding is that the New York Fair was so much bigger. It was some number of thousands of acres versus our little 400-acre fair. And that, it was still a very East Coast centric world that was looking down on what was happening in the West. But my hypothesis is that everybody had plenty of artwork to go around and everything else because it was all being shipped over from Europe at such a furious rate to save it from being destroyed in the war. So there wasn't a shortage. There was a whole Alto building, I think, at the New York Fair. And then also they were quite well represented in San Francisco. So I don't think, perhaps in the, if there weren't a situation that was necessitating saving all this art, it might have been a less, um, uh, there might have been less to go around for everybody, but that didn't seem to be the case. And there was also this very weird charisma that Dorothy Liebes had. I think people would have done anything for her. And so I think she didn't have any trouble getting, what she needed out here for the fair.
I could interject here a little bit. This is Rosemary. That Angelo, my grandfather, Angelo Rossi and LaGuardia, there were several articles about, they had this great banter going back and forth between them, and they did all kinds of pranks. And my grandfather pointed out that some of the things that they had in the fair were actually California products. And so there was a great banter throughout the fair between the two mayors. And it was all very friendly, but they were definitely aware of each other's fairs.
Right. Oh, I'd love to get that I'd love to talk with you more about that.
Yeah, I will let you know. In fact, my
Okay.
grandfather took a whole trainload of people back to the New York Fair.
Oh, cool.
So in the chat, we have a note from Denise Benschuf, who doesn't have a working mic or camera on her computer. It says, "This was wonderful. It's great you've been able to access so many artifacts and even a relation with personal stories."
Yeah, thank you. I have a funny story, really, I mean, only could happen in 1939 story. One of the young women who worked in Dorothy Liebes's studio, in fact, the last surviving person who worked in the San Francisco studio, she is Chinese and Chinese American. She remembers she was about 6 years old. She got on a Muni bus and took the bus with her cousin, like ran away from home kind of thing, to take the bus to the fair. Ended up at the fair on Treasure Island. They wanted to go to Chinese Village. So here they go. I mean, I can't even imagine a Muni driver letting them on the bus today. But anyway, here they go across the bay, across the bridge onto Treasure Island into Chinese Village. And wouldn't they just happen to run into her uncle who busted them and, made them go home? But like, wow, that takes a lot of nerve, but also just a whole different day and age.
Yeah, have you touched base with Anne Harlow, who's writing
Yeah.
a biography of Albert Bender, who's
Yeah.
named?
Yeah, you saw the letter from Dorothy to Albert. They were quite close.
Liz,
Oh.
I'd just like to say that your presentation made me absolutely fall in love with the Dorothy Liebes.
Oh, that's so great.
I kept thinking, if she were alive today, I'd love to hang out with her and hear her stories and just soak up that creative energy that she carried. So you brought her to life for us.
Oh,
And thank you.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear, because I'm definitely smitten by her. I spend days and days with her. My husband says he feels like he's married to two women. I said, well, lucky you.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
So
Tim, I think Tim's trying to say something. Your mouth is moving, but we can't hear you. Or you're chewing something, but I think you're trying to talk. No.
Tim, yeah, okay. Maybe you need to work on your microphone. Anyway, so early on, you showed some places like the Pacific Stock
Mhm.
Exchange, where her fabrics were, I guess, used in part of it. Are any of those fabrics still there in public places, or maybe in Frank Lloyd Wright famous houses of his?
So, yeah, good question. They are not at the Pacific Stock Exchange. I went there. Textiles are fragile and they deteriorate over time. Um, there are some apparently still at Shangri-La in Honolulu. And I know that because by wild coincidence, I'm friends professional friends, I get colleagues with one of Dorothy Liebes's great nephews. He was a principal here in Sebastopol, and I knew him from work. And he told a story of going over to Shangri-La with his family as tourists and going through. And the docent said something about these Liebes textiles. He said, "That's my great aunt." Kind of shut down the tour. But so those exist. And then I was just looking at something. I just connected with somebody on Instagram who was doing an historic restoration of the UN building in New York, because Liebes made these enormous room dividing panels out of rattan and fibers for the UN in the 50s. And they had long since been taken down, and this architect, historic restorer, found them in the basement of the UN. And they don't know what to do with them. Of course, they're enormous and fragile as can be. But in terms of seeing them in the wild, I mean, I have one because the family gave me one, and I mounted it and framed it, which was really special. But Scott, are you aware of any others that are still in, any other textiles that are out in the world that can be, other than in museums? The Hearst Museum has 800 samples that you can see online. Our little Hearst, Berkeley Hearst Museum. Can't hear you, Scott. Oh, Jim, maybe you have to unmute people. Like
Actually, all I can do is ask.
the master unmuting, because
So Scott, there we go.
Okay,
There.
here I am. I can't think of any offhand. I have some Liebes tablecloths and placemats and some things, but there are a lot of intact Francis Elkins rooms in people's houses that have some cases original fabrics, but I can't think of any Liebes textiles that are part of those rooms.
Yeah. Scott's the author of the Francis Elkins book that I referenced. Now Tim might be able to talk. Oh, there. Try now. Oh, no. Unmute. Still can't hear him. Yeah, and so Rosemary and I have overlap in our research, because there are lots of incidences of Dorothy Liebes meeting with her grandfather, and photographs of them, and also Anne and I do, because of the Bender connection. Can we hear you now, Tim? Nope.
Yeah, we have another note from
No.
in the chat from Leslie Friedman, who says, "Fascinating paper. Congratulations. Sorry that I just go to teach. Truly enjoyed it." So,
Thank you.
are there any other comments or questions?
Maybe Tim, can you type yours into the chat? Because we can't hear you. Also, here, I'll put my email in the chat, and that way if anybody wants to send me anything.
Is there anybody in the group that would be willing to write up a summary of Liz's wonderful talk for the newsletter? Can we not leave this meeting till someone volunteers?
And the AI recording has been, I've found very useful in putting such things together, and that you would have that, whoever raises their hand would have that as an option.
But Rosemary, I'm totally happy to send you a summary. I mean, it's not objective, obviously, but
Yeah, okay. If worse comes to worse, although it would be wonderful, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you.
yes, indeed. Thanks for the nice comments. It's really fun. It's just such a fun topic. She's so easy to write about, and thank God for the online archive. And I just find something every day but I also have been out a lot to many, so many different archives, and the Albert Bender stuff is at Mills, of course, and Stanford, and the Tim Pfluger is at Bancroft, and the Jewish history is at Bancroft. So I got all the Hellman House stuff, and it's just Lots of fun. That just is yeah.
Speaking of which, Denise writes, thank you so much for inviting me to attend. This is the kind of research and writing that I love to do. So you're inspiring people here. There.
Well, and I just have to give Scott so much credit. He's been such a help to me and so generous with his time. And Frances Elkins and Dorothy Liebes were great friends. They traveled the world together and did so many projects together. They were sisters, really. So it's nice to have people out in the world who are doing similar work with just with different people, but you overlap in so many ways. It's exciting. Great way to spend my days.
Okay, well, thank everyone for coming.
Yeah.
in
Tim,
the-
please send me an email if you have a question, particularly for me. I put my email address in the chat.
Yeah, and we, as usual, IHS will not have a presentation in December, but we'll be back in January. And Dan is not here to let us know who that will be, but I hope everyone can come. And thanks again, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.